You know, I like our sanctuary. Do you like our sanctuary? Do you like this space? It's simple, but it's beautiful. It has great acoustics. The statue of the risen Christ in the front and the amazing icon of the Holy Trinity in the back help remind us that we are in the presence of God. But today, I feel like the sanctuary lacks something. You know, that it lacks something. You know, there aren't a lot of windows here. I mean, one little space of windows in the back, and you really can't even see very much out of that window. I mean, really, only I can see out of the window. You can't if you're facing the right direction. And today, as we talk about God's amazing creation, I feel the lack of windows. When I was in college, there was a church in the town of Bishop, California, and there was a huge window. Basically, the whole wall behind the altar was a window, and the window looked out on the Sierra Nevada mountains. Amazing. Amazingly beautiful. So on days when the sermon or the music wasn't really that good, it was still worth going to worship just to see that view, just to see that beauty of God's creation. Because creation is amazing and beautiful. I mean, you don't have to go to the Sierra Nevada, you don't have to travel to New Zealand to know that the earth is full of beauty. You can see incredible foliage and stunning sunsets even right here in Rockville. Creation is a miracle. I mean, think about it. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there so much to this universe? Why is it there? That's really the first miracle. The Bible tells us, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning. That there's a starting point for the universe. And really, what went on before the starting point isn't known to us. And that's true whether you're a theologian or a scientist. There's a beginning, and what happened before that beginning is pretty much unknown. Interestingly, though, although scientists say we don't know what happened before the beginning, the Bible does tell us a little bit about what was going on, what God was doing before creation sprang into existence at God's invitation. According to the letter to the Ephesians, God was doing something very, very important even before he called the stars and galaxies into existence. He was thinking about you. Quote, "Even before he made the universe, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes." That's an incredible statement. Before there were stars and planets, before there were protons and neutrons, God loved you. You were on God's mind. Whenever you doubt your importance in the vast scheme of things, whenever you're tempted to think that you're only a tiny little organism on a mote of dust floating around in a vast universe, remember that. Before the creation of the cosmos, there's the Greek word for world or universe. Before the creation of the cosmos, God chose you. God chose you to be a recipient of God's love. Then there was the beginning. And it's significant that in Genesis, the way it all starts is by God speaking. God spoke, "Let there be light," and there was light. God spoke, "Let the land produce vegetation," and all sorts of plants sprang into existence. God spoke, "Let the water teem with living creatures," and all sorts of fish and sea creatures came into existence. You see, a creation story is something that helps us make sense of the world, something that tells us some basic truths about existence. There were many creation stories that were floating around at the time that Genesis was written down. One of the main competitors with the Genesis story was a story called the Enuma Elish. It was a Babylonian creation myth. And in that story, Marduk, the chief Babylonian god, kills Tiamat, the goddess of the seas and oceans, splits her body in half, creates the skies with one half and the earth with the other half, Then he kills another god named Kingu, spills his blood on the ground, and out of clay and Kingu's blood makes human beings so that human beings can be the slaves of the gods, so that the gods don't have to do work anymore. Well, there's a different way of looking at the world, huh? Look at the world that God gives us in Genesis. In Genesis, the world doesn't come into existence through violence. It comes into existence through the invitation of God. Let there be. There's no destruction or battle in Genesis. The world doesn't start with a battle. It starts with God's gentle command. In Genesis, humans are made in God's image to care for the beautiful creation that God has entrusted to us. Humans aren't slaves created so that God doesn't need to work anymore. Human beings are made to be the agents of God, made in the image of God. And the world is entrusted to us. And God expects us and trusts us to care for it. Significantly, humans, like God, rest on the seventh day and just simply enjoy what God has made. The message for us is that creation is meant to be enjoyed. That serving God and caring for creation are not burdensome tasks that God has given us because God just wants to step back and not do anything. Instead, God is still active in the world. We'll see that next week. On the 8th day, God goes back to work, and God invites human beings to work with him in this beautiful creation. If there's one thing that's clear from Genesis 1, it's that the creation is good. God made it good, and God saw that it was good. That phrase is repeated 6 times. Light is good. The land and the seas are good. The sun, the moon, the stars are good. All the living creatures in the sea, the air, and the land are good. The last time after human beings are created, God says, and it was very good. Sometimes we miss how good and beautiful the world is. We're in a hurry maybe, and we just don't see it, right? We just are so busy that we don't see the beauty that's right there in front of our faces. I mean, when's the last time you really looked at a leaf? Leaves are really incredible things if you look at them. Amazingly beautiful and amazingly useful too. Tough to have, we wouldn't have quite enough oxygen without leaves. At other times, maybe we just focus on all the bad things that are in the world, the things that aren't so good or beautiful. I mean, everything from crabgrass to genocide can make us feel like the world is not a very good place. And there's no doubt that there is a lot of brokenness. There is even a lot of outright evil in the world. But it started out good. It started out very good. And notice that God doesn't say that the world is perfect. It's good. It's filled with beauty and meaning and purpose if our eyes are open to see it. Genesis tells us that we live in an ordered world. And scientists will tell you the same thing. There are laws of physics, there are laws of nature. Things function according to them and are predictable. Now, some people try to set up a conflict between faith and science, between the universe described by Genesis 1 and the universe described by the Big Bang theory and the theory of relativity. But see, I don't really see a conflict here. Science and faith are describing the world from 2 different perspectives, although I think there is some overlap. I mean, as I said, the Bible does tell us that there was a beginning. And we know that the most widely accepted scientific theory about the universe is that there was a beginning. There was a Big Bang, that the universe had a definite beginning. Now, to most people, to most of us, the Big Bang theory of the universe is probably the only one that we know. But the reality is as recently as the 1950s and 60s, there were a lot of very reputable scientists who believed in what was called the steady state theory, that the universe was just always there, always the same, always has been. You know, people from Aristotle up through Fred Hoyle believed that the universe had always just been there. What's interesting to me is that the person who came up with the Big Bang Theory is Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian Roman Catholic priest. And he saw no conflict between his science and his faith. He saw no conflict between the two. But it was tough for people to accept, for some people to accept that the universe had a beginning, like it says in the book of Genesis, that there was a start. Even Albert Einstein had a tough time with Lemaitre's theory. He said, "Your calculations are correct, but your physics is atrocious." I mean, later Einstein got on board and endorsed the Big Bang Theory. But see, science, like faith, is not all laid out. We grow in our understanding of the world in both dimensions. See, at first, Einstein dismissed the Big Bang. He couldn't believe that the universe had a start. And we're the same way. We can dismiss things too. I mean, we can use our faith to dismiss science, or we can use science to dismiss what's in the Bible. However, when we do either one of those things, we miss a big part of the truth. Genesis speaks of creation from the perspective of poetry and purpose. It's not a scientific description of precisely how things happen in 6 24-hour periods. I really don't think that the author of Genesis meant us to take it that way. I mean, just read it. There is talk of days, right? There was evening and there was morning the first day, the second day, the third day. And then on the fourth day, the sun and moon are created. Do you see a little kind of disconnect here? Do you really think that the person whom God inspired to write this down was so dumb that they were like, the sun rises and sets, that's a day, but the sun wasn't created till day 4. It's poetry, right? This is meant to say that God has made the world in a structured and ordered way and has made it a place of beauty and meaning. The point is that these verses are not a scientific description of what happened in 3 days of 86,400 seconds each. It's a description of God making a beautiful world, account of a creator God who makes it clear that the sun, the moon, the stars, all these created things are simply created things, that people were tempted to worship them, but they're not worthy of worship. Only the creator God is. And then, on the other hand, science sometimes gets caught up in what Brian McLaren calls nothing buttery. Nothing buttery. Maybe it's a diet, nothing, don't have anything buttery in the meal. So nothing buttery, like that, when we could look at the world in a very limited scientific way, we could look at, for example, a sunset and say, look at that sunset of gold and red and pink. Well, that's nothing but light being scattered by particles in the atmosphere. Or you could look at the northern lights and say, that's nothing but charged particles from the sun striking atoms in the Earth's atmosphere that causes electrons to jump a level, and then when they go back down, it lets light out, and we see that display. And while it's true that the sunset is caused by light bouncing off particles, and it's true that that explanation of northern lights is accurate, if you've ever seen one of those things, you know that that's not all it is. Nothing but. There's also beauty. There's also life. There's also joy in seeing those things. I mean, if you've ever seen a fantastic display of the aurora borealis, you would never say it's nothing but. The story of creation is not so much an explanation about the past as an invitation to live faithfully and joyfully in the present. The story tells us that the world is, at its deepest level, good and ordered and made with us in mind. We have a place in this creation that God has given us. And Jesus points to this good creation and reminds us of the evidence of God's goodness and care that we can see there if we just look with the eyes of faith. Look at the birds of the air, Jesus says. Look at the flowers of the field. God created the world in such a way that the birds flourish and the flowers fill meadows. Jesus invites us to look around at the incredible creation God has made and to find our place in it. Try to keep your eyes open and see the world around you. God invites us to let go of our worry and anxiety and join him in enjoying the world that he has made. That's not a bad place to start. You might even say that it's good. Thanks be to God.